In the last video, we talked about trying to get one of these flexible handles to fit onto this shaft where we have a rigid metal handle. And this one fits fine. This is the one from the right ascension axis, of course. But the problem is, this hole is 8mm, the shaft is 8mm, and you cannot buy these. You're lucky if you can find one used. The only ones you can buy are these. They look very similar, right? But there is a slight difference. All the new ones come with a 6mm hole. Old ones are 8mm, the new ones are 6mm. So the problem is, how do you get a 6mm to fit on an 8mm connection shaft? Well, you have to find an adapter. And as it turns out, I wrote to Bob's Knobs to see if they had a part. And they didn't, but he gave me a suggestion. He said to see if I could get a coupler. And as it turns out, there is a coupler that goes from 8mm to 6mm. Hard to believe. Apparently this is a very common coupler that's used in the 3D printing industry, but here we go. So we have an 8mm that fits right on there, very snug, perfect. The only problem is, now we have to figure out how to hook up this flexible cable with this 6mm handle. And I think I'm going to try to find a bolt that perhaps I can cut to length that'll fit in between here. So let's take a look at my old random bolt tub. Now I need to know where to cut the flats into this. Let's mark this. Kind of like a machinist's bluing, I think is what they used to call it. Let's put this in there. Just tighten this up a little bit. And see if that came out. There, we can see right there. Little nub in the ink. So we'll put this back in the vise and file a little flat spot. We'll do the same with the other side too. Looks good. We'll do the same to the other. Okay, so here's the new / used flexible cable, the 6mm, and here's the 8mm to 6mm adapter. So let's go ahead and put this little 6mm shaft in the one end. Tight down. Got this one right there. Find the flat spot on there, and everything turns. All right, so this means that we now have flexible cables on all of the axes. There we go. So we have adjustment on all of them. Now, let's move on to fixing up the telescope. Let's take the focuser out first. It's pretty loose. Mark this. All right, let's take a look at this. The focuser wheel itself is pretty loose, and you can see that it fell or was dropped and banged this half of the axle. It's pretty loose. The focuser itself is, you know, seems to be working pretty well. I haven't found any really stripped gears yet, so I would consider this pretty lucky. The fact that this was damaged without stripping the gears is actually pretty rare. I'm gonna take this diagonal out just for safety. Put it over here on this awesome modern day science fiction book. And let's see. Yeah, this is good. Let's go ahead and see what we can do to straighten up this axle. This is actually good. It's a little bit bent. Oof, that's got a pretty good bend to it. I'll put it in the vise and see if I can bend it back. A little bit better. Let me do some fine tuning on this. So here it is. It's a lot straighter. Let's just give a quick scrub to these handles. Pretty straight. Now there's still some grease on there. I'm going to put it back on the gears. Now this should fit right on there. Now the question is, what about this guy? This is all bent out of shape. I'm just going to hammer it. I'm going to squish this flat in the vise. All right, so let's put this on. And these screws back in. All right, and here's the tension screw. That works really well. I would say the focuser is all fixed. I'd say it's adjusted. There's not much slop in it. It's cleaned up. And the focuser axle is pretty straight. So move on to the next thing. You may notice that one of these bolts is broken. This guy, the head fell off this one, or broke off of it. The other ones seem to be okay. Let's get these out here. They've got these little lock washers on them. But this one, the head snapped off. That's okay, we've got a replacement. It's not the exact same size, but it'll do. We'll just get one that is close. And it has to have this little lock washer. These are all going to be 4mm. That seems to be the common size. All right, there we go. So we'll call this done. All right, so here is the lens cap. It has this green felt. We're going to clean this up a little bit, and we're just going to put this brown felt that I have on here. So let's go ahead. This isn't too dirty. I've had telescopes in the past that were from former homes where they smoked. Not passing judgment on smoking. All I'm saying is that the tar from the smoke tends to stick to telescopes, especially the metal parts, and it comes off. And it takes a while to scrub it off, and usually I have to use after the simple green, I might use some Windex, and then I have to use some isopropyl alcohol to get that off. But this actually looks really good. This has been taken care of really well. I'm going to remove the felt. It might just come off. It's 40 years of old felt. Okay, well, it actually took about an hour of using a plastic scraper, and then I had to try a wire brush, and then finally I came down to using an X-Acto knife, and it took forever. Okay, that took way more effort than it should have, but we're going to go ahead and put the self-adhesive felt on now. Okay, let's see how it fits. That is a nice snug fit. Oh yeah, it's going to protect it. All right. Okay, now I guess we can unscrew the lens part. All right. I'm going to be very careful here. If you've seen my other video on the stellar view, you know how extra careful I'm going to be with the lens cell here. I think, okay. Okay, so the only thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to clean very gently the surfaces of these. I'm not going to take it apart. Let's try just air first. Oh, that cleaned up really well. Look at that. That cleaned up really well. I like that. Look at that. That's super clean, and that's about where I'm going to leave it. Now we just have to reassemble the telescope. Okay, let's go ahead and put the lens on. All right, now for the focuser. Okay, now it's time to put the focuser tube back in. All right. So there's really only two things left. The first is to repair the crosshairs on the viewfinder, and the second thing is to put an accessories tray on the telescope mount underneath the top of the mount. Let's go ahead and start looking at this. We'll just unscrew this. And the crosshairs are very, very fine. Let's see if we can get a good view of this. You can see the hairs, right? And they're actually broken. They're extremely fine. See, there they are. We're gonna have to open this up. It's got a little interior nut that unscrews. I think I found the finest wire that I could find. It's this tiny copper wire, electrical wire. So I'm going to pull some strands out and use this as a replacement. This is actually thicker than the stuff that's in here. Let's see if we can give you a comparison. So there's the new stuff. It's much thicker, but that's about the best I can do right now. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is remove this interior ring. There's two little slots that make it possible, but you need either needle nose pliers or some kind of special tool. I'm going to try this with needle nose. All right, so the way they did this, they apparently laid the wires across here with little dabs of glue, and then they just screwed in like that and squeezed it flat. Now, it's very important that the focal distance is the same there. I'll probably go ahead and clean the lenses a little bit, but we're going to go ahead and repair this using these wires. Okay, so here's what we've got. I've taken the lenses and everything out of here. I'm going to end up using this as a tool. Here is the piece. It's threaded, and it has, I looked really close under a magnifying glass, where the wires cross over, there's the tiniest of grooves cut into this. And I'm going to take this little triangular file and recut those grooves so that I can put the new wires, and these are, of course, the thinnest wires that I could find. I'm going to put them across there. Now, there's going to be an issue in that the wires aren't very tight, and they might sag. So I'm going to do this while they're up here, and I'm going to use tape to keep the wires as tight as possible. So first we have to cut these little grooves. They're very tiny. All right, let's move on to the next one. We almost need a microscope for this telescope, at least for the work we're doing. All right. So that's ready to go. Now we just need to glue the wires in. And I'm going to use some epoxy. It's not going to take much. This is the part B, the hardener. I'm going to mix it up really well. Now I need a very fine point. I'm actually going to use the edge of this X-Acto knife to get the epoxy in here. This is 5-minute epoxy, so we kind of have to work quickly. Put this over here so I don't mess it up. Take our first strand and just lay it across there in the grooves. Pull it as tight as possible. It's going to be tricky, I can tell. We're going to use a little bit of tape. All right. Just make sure this is it's in the groove. A little bit of glue epoxy on there. Let's take another strand. Let me make sure the glue is down there. I got a little blob of glue. Gotta get rid of that. Here's the new crosshairs. And here it is. You can see where the epoxy was put on. And while the epoxy is curing, I guess we should go ahead and work on that accessory tray that goes in the tripod. And then we'll put this back together. All right, so what do we want to do with this eyepiece tray? Well, our main challenge is that it's going to be resting on 3 legs that are attached at 120 degrees, like this. There's a bolt in the middle. So the eyepiece tray, I'm going to make it simple. I'm just going to make it circular. I'm going to put 2 holes per arc like that to hold eyepieces. And, you know, to make sure that these stay 120 degrees apart, I'm going to make sure that basically the tray has channels that are essentially machined into the plastic that will trap these metal straps that hold the legs together. So let's go ahead and 3D print this. It's going to take a while, I assume. First I have to design it in CAD and then print it. But through the miracle of movie magic, let's go ahead and make this fast, okay? 1, 2, and 14 hours later. 3. All right. So here it is. It has the 6 eyepiece holes. It has the hole for the bolt in the middle. Flip it over, and what do we have? Well, we have these channels. I just decided to make them go all the way across to give me some variability for attaching it. But note that they are at different heights, and that's because those straps of metal, they're about 100 thousandths of an inch thick. So that should allow them to basically stack up. And this is going to trap the legs so that they're 120 degrees apart. Let's go ahead and install this on the tripod. Let me show you how it looks. And here it is. This is the 3D printed eyepiece accessory tray, complete with the 6 holes. It can hold up to 6 eyepieces, 1.25 inches. And the central bolt is just 1/4 with a wing nut. Now let's take a look at the bottom. It makes this a little bit special. Okay, so you can see there are slats or lanes and channels cut into it. They're about, essentially they're every 60 degrees, but the purpose of this is to make sure that the leg braces that hold right here stay exactly 120 degrees apart, and that gives some rigidity to the entire tripod structure. So I think that's going to work out pretty well. Now at this point, the only thing left to do is to give this telescope a test. And as it turns out, tonight there is really no moon to see, but Jupiter is out, and we can also give it a star test. So let's go play with this newly finished telescope. All right, so we have one last thing to put on the equatorial mount, and that is its little bubble. So we'll put the bubble right here, right in the middle, and that should be good. All right, so we've dragged the telescope outside. I did a polar alignment on the equatorial mount. I just followed the simple steps that are in the other video I have. I'll link that down below. And it is working pretty good so far. I did a star test. I pointed it at a star, I focused it, and then I defocused it to see if I would get those the classical concentric circles, and I did. The optics on this are looking very good and very lined up. I now have it pointed at Jupiter. Let's take a look and see what we can see. Wow. Jupiter looks pretty fantastic. I really like this telescope. Well, I guess the restoration of this Meade 320 is complete, but that is not the end of the story. My research shows that this was purchased in 1986. Now, a lot of telescopes were sold in 1986, all thanks to Halley's Comet. Personally, I remember this very well because my dad took me to a star party that was hosted by the Columbus Astronomical Society. And everybody there was trying to find Halley's Comet. At the time, I had my own cheap refractor telescope that I think I had purchased from the JCPenney Christmas catalog. At the time, my telescope came with these smaller 0.965-inch eyepieces, just under an inch in diameter. Now, there's nothing wrong with these. People still use these today. But in 1986, every entry-level telescope came with these low-cost eyepieces. And that is one more clue that this telescope was very special. It skipped over the cheap eyepieces and it hit the ground running with these higher-priced, full 1.25-inch eyepieces. These are the standards today. You know, in fact, the list price for this back then was $900. So that would be well over about $2,400 in today's money. That would put it up near the Explorer Scientific or maybe a low-end Stellar View brand of telescope today. The person who bought this telescope was paying a premium price. I noted earlier that the views from this are fantastic. It turns out that this telescope was built in Japan by a company called Mizar, and they were sold here locally through Meade. Now, Mizar was known for very high quality manufacturing, and as we've seen, it really shows from the optics to the surprisingly smooth rack and pinion focuser and even the sturdy equatorial mount. The good news is that you can still find these Meade 320 telescopes for sale occasionally on the used markets, and depending on the accessories, they still command a price of around $300. Now, if you find one of these for a good price, like my friend did who bought it for $10, well, then I recommend you grab it before somebody else does. I look forward to handing this back to my friend so that they can use it for years to come. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Clear skies, everybody. All thanks to Haley's